Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Embracing Change Summit presented by Cohort 8 of the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute at Miami University of Ohio. My name is Brad Schmitz, and I will be your MC for the summit. In today's world, embracing change is such an incredibly vital topic that can help us in all facets of life. As change is being forced upon many of us through the COVID-19 pandemic, now is possibly the best time that you can start to think about what it means to embrace change and adapt with whatever the world throws at us. But before we begin, we would like everyone who's currently watching the live stream to say hello and chat. Tell us where you're watching this from. If you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to our panelists in the chat window. We have people from Chicago, Arizona, Ohio. We have someone from Vietnam. Wow. So we have people all around the world watching the Embracing Change live stream, which is such an awesome thing to really watch when it comes to embracing change. This is incredible. Wow. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute's director, Professor Louise Moorman.
Thank you, Brad. Karen Moss and I and all the students of the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute are just thrilled to welcome you today. We have a great mix of well over 100 people registered, business leaders, executive coaches, and lots of wonderful alums of the Leadership Institute, students and faculty, even some parents, and some very special friends. Sending virtual hugs to each of you. We never imagined we'd be in your homes today, but the students embraced change and converted an event that was supposed to be an all-afternoon event in the Art Museum to virtual. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. And a special thanks to Jeff Wilcox and our friends from Lockheed Martin who have made the entire Leadership Institute possible. Thank you. The world has certainly turned upside down since our juniors selected the topic of embracing change for this summit last September. The students the year before had selected the topic of digital transformation, so they were wise to know that change was in their futures, even before the pandemic. Not only did the students pick the perfect topic, I think how they describe embracing change is excellent. The personal determination to develop an open mind, embody inclusiveness, and inspire creativity daily. Our program today covers all those topics. We start off with Julie Elberfeld, Senior Vice President from Capital One, and her topic is the leadership challenge of the next decade, embracing a shifting workforce. Next, you're going to hear from our students about what they've been learning about for the last couple semesters: resiliency, blind spots, saboteurs that hold us back from embracing change. They've studied some pretty complex topics like adult development and brain science, reading many books and articles, and integrating that in their lives. And lastly, we'll give you a brief taste of what some of our alums from the Leadership Institute have to say. We know there's not going to be enough time for interaction during the webinar, so we're sending you an email with a link to a regular Zoom meeting that's going to start at 3:15 Eastern Standard Time following this webinar. That way you can ask more questions of the speakers. You can actually see each other. It's sort of an after party. And because we're all technical people, we know technology is fabulous, and we're also smart enough to know that things will always go wrong. So our students have some backup plans in case there are some problems. I'll turn it over to you, Brad, to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Professor Moorman. So as she said, we have a couple backup things in plan just in case we have any sort of technology issues. So first off, all audience members will be muted on entry just to reduce the amount of background noise present in today's webinar. If you have any questions or concerns about video quality or anything else, please go to the chat window and direct them to all panelists in chat. We will also be, if the quality of the live stream showings of our videos is insufficient, we'll be providing links to those on YouTube upon the start of each video. So you can go visit those on YouTube should the live stream quality be insufficient. And lastly, we're also alternatively streaming this webinar on YouTube. So if the quality of this webinar is insufficient for you or something errors out, you can just go to YouTube and search for Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute, and it should be one of the first results. And now, without further ado, I will be turning over to Professor Mormon to introduce Julie Elberfeld, our keynote speaker for the day.
We're so excited to have Julie with us. Julie Elberfeld has an extremely impressive background. She is the Senior Vice President of Card Technology at Capital One and their executive sponsor of diversity and inclusion for technology. She speaks frequently and is really well known in the tech world. We asked Julie to be our keynote speaker because she is a change maker. She is one of those people who have really made a difference and makes the world a better place. And of course, I have to mention, Julie is an alum of Miami University. So Julie, I'd love to turn it over to you. I'm excited to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you so much, Louise. I really am so honored for this opportunity to speak with you all today. I really truly know that the Lockheed Martin students had many choices of people they could have invited, and I'm truly humbled to be selected. And I'm just so glad that we're going ahead with this despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. Here we all are in our homes or wherever we're able to isolate. I'm in my home with this kind of makeshift office that I've created for myself. Just to give you a little idea of my setup, I'm standing up, so I'll have a little bit of movement here because that's better for me for presenting. I have a second monitor, so you may see me glance over to see the video and see what you're seeing to make sure everything's going well. But I'll try to keep my focus here in front of me where you can where we can feel like we're together, even though it's a little odd to be talking to the trees out my window. So without further ado, let's get started. I had the opportunity to come to Miami last spring with another Miami alum who is a great friend of mine, Andy Stefanovich. And Andy and I had a chance to talk to the Leadership Institute then about how companies are continuously reinventing themselves in this time of digital transformation per the theme from last year. And what we talked about was this idea that the real change in approach often has to start with the leader themselves. And Andy is an amazing innovation consultant and thinking partner for me. And he really helped me think differently about how to lead my tech teams and how that really had to start right with me. My own orientation to innovation, to trying new approaches, to accepting the agile approach and allowing for more fast failures. Those were all really essential skills that I had to create for myself. And I had to embrace that change in order to allow me to lead my teams effectively in this digital transformation. Well, that was last spring. And today, I really want to talk to you about another related, but even more important talent-oriented change that I had to embrace really just in the last 6 years of my career. And that is how I became a leader of diversity and inclusion, my journey to that change, and what I think you could consider to be inclusive leaders in a shifting workforce. But given these circumstances, I really wanted to take a little bit of a segue in my content that I hadn't originally planned, but given the circumstances seems so appropriate. You know, we're here today on video because of this global crisis that none of us could have imagined. And this reality actually shifted the way that I said I wanted to frame things for today. I know it's gotten me thinking about life and family and work and connections in a really different way. And I know we've all had to make tremendous adaptations and had to be flexible, agile, and do our work or our schooling wherever we can from our self-isolation spots. But I have to tell you, I haven't been proud of everything the tech industry's done in the last decades, but I just can't help but be super proud of the way technology is enabling our experiences and our ability to stay connected, and how truly impossible it would have been for the world to keep running the way that it has if it weren't for technology in this challenging time. The digital transformation or digital revolution that we talked about is clearly in full swing. And I really am finding that companies and organizations who embrace that change sooner are responding better today than others. The big tech companies are perhaps overcoming some of their negative press by stepping up in really big ways right now. Innovation and creativity and technology has retooled factory lines in literally days to create medical equipment. We've all seen what 3D printing has been able to do to produce shields and other equipment. And in my world in banking, it's made it possible for us to react literally overnight to moving 7,000 call center agents to work from home and to make offers available to our customers who really need our support right now. All that enabled by that digital transformation that just wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. So I would say innovation is laying raw in front of us right now, and it's pretty crazy inspiring for somebody who spent 30 years in technology, seeing technology really used for good, which is what I've always felt that it was all about. But something else is laying raw in front of us, and that is inequity. You know, I may be home, I'm working almost seamlessly, quite honestly, I'm getting paid. I've been able to use my internet connectivity to buy groceries online, have them delivered, to buy masks, cleaning products, and pretty much anything I need to stay productive and safe. I've also been fortunate to have a lifetime access to quality healthcare, good food to eat, that gave me a really great shot at good health. But it shouldn't be a surprise to us. We're seeing that those most differentially impacted in this crisis are those who suffer economically. And we know that in the US, that falls along demographic lines. Women, especially women of color and men of color. People who work gig jobs, hourly workers in retail, restaurants, hotels, airlines, so many other industries are now without incomes. And they also have higher odds of a more vulnerable health profile given the decades of inequity. You know, many people just don't even have internet to buy things or to help their children with their online education. And so this vicious cycle continues. In fact, I find it fascinating that Microsoft did this broadband study just a couple years ago and found that almost half of Americans do not even have internet in their home. Some of them, 21 million, have no access available to them, but the rest of the people just can't afford it. And I have to believe that that number might be going up in this moment in time. And McKinsey just released a study a couple days ago that I had to kind of mention here. They had looked at 5 factors that indicate which US counties have the likelihood of being the hardest hit from COVID-19 based on underlying health conditions, poverty rates, number of hospital beds, percentage of people in severe housing conditions, and population density. And they found that there were 533 counties that fell into the top 3 deciles of negative impact. And in those counties, 43 African Americans live in those counties versus only 30% of white people. So I tell you this to ensure, one, that you have a sensitivity to this now, as it's easy for us to extrapolate our own circumstances and apply that to everyone. I also wanted to frame the timeliness of our conversation today when we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, which is really just the formal practices for trying to address inequities. And I really wanted to propose the question to you too. Will we allow these times of adaptation to turn into true times of learning and in embracing real change? Because to be honest with you, my own sensitivity to this inequity may not have been as heightened just a few years ago. Perhaps I would have seen the headlines and just not really read on, or maybe I just wouldn't have internalized it quite so deeply. Perhaps I might have even assigned root cause to the people themselves versus the systems, as many are doing now, unfortunately. But a huge shift, fortunately, came to me through my work, and it shifted the way that I look at people in the world. So I want to now turn to telling you a little bit about my own journey. And we're going to go back a little bit, because I think it's really important that you have the context of my journey and maybe even help a little bit with understanding my background and the implicit biases that I'm likely to carry, and how I've leveraged curiosity and my willingness to learn through my life to arrive at where I am today. I really think it's super important that people are vulnerable and willing to tell their stories so that we can really start to appreciate each other. And we need to listen, really listen to other people's stories. So one of the misconceptions that sometimes people have about me, given the role that I'm in today, and particularly as a white woman, that I most likely came from a different place than I did. And I think it's really important to understand misconceptions because they really lead to biases. So my story is one that is somewhat unlikely, I think, and sometimes even pinch myself a little bit to realize where I am today. I grew up in a little town in Wabash, Indiana, population 10,000. It's on the map there in case you're calling from all over the world, as I saw people were, because it's not a very well-known town, just a little tiny town in northern Indiana. My parents, neither one had an opportunity to go to college. They were able to move into professional jobs throughout their careers, but didn't get to go to college. And of my grandparents, only one of them even graduated from high school. We lived in a little 700 square foot house with my family of 5 in Wabash. And I've always loved this picture of me looking a little sassy there in my little red shoes, because those clothes were actually hand-me-downs from my cousin. I had a cousin who is just a year and a half older than me and lived in the big city of Cincinnati. And she would mail me her clothes, but they got too little for her. And I think even though that dress looks like it was a little too short, I was still really happy to have it. The other thing about the community where I grew up was it was pretty homogenous, just not a lot of diversity where I was growing up. And, you know, my world was pretty little, but the things that made it bigger for me was we were in the midst of the Apollo space mission, and it was such a passion of mine. And I really just, I think where it sparked my interest in math and science. And we went to the movie pretty much every weekend because there wasn't much else to do. And so those were the things that made my world a little bit bigger than Wabash, Indiana. But those weren't very diverse role models for me either in those eras, because there just wasn't much diversity even in films. So I think this is important to my journey. The next step was that we moved to the suburbs of Chicago. And it was quite a shock for a family that had been living in this little town. But it was really, truly the first time that I was ever exposed to people talking about different religions and ethnicities. It was so cool that my neighbors were proud to be Italian or Polish or Irish, and it was just something we had just never been exposed to. But let's just say it was still a pretty white community. And I did move 2 more times before I finished high school, but to similar types of communities. Well, here's my Miami story. My family used to drive through Oxford when I was a kid, going from Wabash to where my dad lived in Cincinnati. My dad's family had lived. And I always had this big dream that I was going to go to Miami from the time I was probably 4 years old. I ended up as a math major, so I spent a lot of time in Bachelor Hall. And I've always loved this picture of Bachelor Hall in the snow. At the time, Miami also lacked diversity. In fact, it felt like a pretty privileged place, and we were at that time, I think that was when we first got the label of the Ivy League of the Midwest. And for me, actually, there were times when I didn't feel quite like I belonged. I was had this background that I carried with me. We always sort of see ourselves in our child's eye. And I was also a commuter, and I had 3 jobs trying to get myself through school because my parents couldn't afford to send me to Miami, but I was so passionate to go there that I made it work about this. But another thing that was going on in my college years were the very early days of the AIDS and HIV crisis. And for the first time in my life, I know this sounds odd to you younger folks, but people were talking about being gay. And I really just wasn't something that had been talked about before this time. And so I was so blessed to actually be working in one of my 3 jobs with people from the gay community. And they really started to help me appreciate that there are challenges for marginalized populations. And I think this was a start of my openness to the idea that the world doesn't present itself equally to everyone. So the next step of my journey, I started graduate school at Miami after deciding I didn't really want to work in academia. I went out to look for a job with my math degree in hand, and I was really lucky that a bank in Cincinnati, Fifth Third Bank, took a chance on me. They offered me a chance to become a computer programmer. They just believed in me despite the fact that I didn't have a computer science degree, and they wanted to teach me to code. Well, I was pretty afraid. I didn't feel like I was sure I could compete, but I really embraced this change in my career plans. And it was, let's just say, a good decision. It really changed the course of my life. And, you know, everything has been great in my career in technology. But I think it's interesting to know some things about what tech was like in that era, because it's important to the conversation that we're going to continue to have here. IT in the time was really only the domain of fairly large corporations, of government and academia. And really few people understood what it was. We were sort of those nerdy people in the back office that were making things happen that people really appreciated. We loved what we did, but it didn't really have a lot of glory to it. The culture was pretty different than it is today. And another really important thing is that my team was half women. Women were 40% of tech workers, in fact, in that era. And so for me, I never really gave it any consideration that being a woman in technology was in any way odd or different. One more step in my career, and we'll get really on with the story, and that is that in 2010, I had the opportunity to come to work for Capital One as a CIO for their commercial bank. This meant that my husband and I had to move to Richmond, Virginia, which was quite a shift for two Midwesterners. Our children were grown, so they didn't have to come with us. But it was a pretty big, scary change. And I really came to love the experience that I had in the Mid-Atlantic region. I worked a lot in New York City as well. And I dove fully into this change and really came to appreciate the culture and the people that I was exposed to. I was working right alongside people that were just so different than me, and there was so much diversity. It was more than I had ever experienced in the Midwest, certainly in my workplace. I took you through a pretty lengthy story of how I had embraced change in my leadership, but I think it's important that we understand that we're the sum of our experiences, and they shape our thinking and our sensitivities to the world around us. And I think you can appreciate that I led a pretty sheltered Midwestern white person's life, even if my family was economic status was a little bit modest as a child. And it's important to understand how we come to embrace changes in our careers that shape the way that we think about our lives. And that's really what I want to talk to you about now, this biggest change of my entire life that came just 6 years ago. So my career was just humming along at Capital One, and I was, building teams and doing some really cool technology. And in the spring of 2014, everything changed. These two young ladies, Katie and Kaylin, who were part of our technology development program and literally just a year out of college, popped in my office and they talked to me about the representation or the lack thereof of women in technology. And they suggested that we sponsor a conference and support a nonprofit that they were involved with. Well, you know what I could have done? I could have kind of said, yeah, I don't think so. Or I could have given them a small gesture with a small donation for the nonprofit. And in fact, that would have been in line with the way that I had traditionally looked at things. I, throughout my career, had tended to shy away a little bit from formal women's initiatives. I'd gone through my experiences at Capital One. And at a similar time, my niece, who was in high school at the time, shared with me this story that one of her substitute teachers, who was a woman, by the way, had asked her at the beginning of one of the coding classes why she was taking this boys' class. And that really impacted her deeply. And so as I listened to Katie and Kaylin and I thought about my niece's experience, my curiosity really got the best of me. And I started to ask a lot of questions. And what I found really sparked this flame in me that was so unexpected and has really taken me on an entirely new journey for the last 6 years. So a little bit about what I found in the data that I started to look at. It's something that we sometimes refer to as the leaky tech pipeline. And it's something like this: despite the fact that girls and boys start with equal interest and aptitude in elementary school for math and science, by junior high, the girls are really starting to lose interest in STEM education. It continues in the last 6 years that I've been doing this work, still 18%. And even when women show interest in the major, they tend to drop out by their second year of college. So as a result of this, women are making up less than a quarter of all tech workers today. Remember, it was 40% when I was first started out. And it's continuing to decline, in fact, and predicted to go potentially all the way down to 20% without some sort of material disruption. And the last stat on this slide, the fact that 56% of women drop out of tech, even after they've invested 10 to 15 years in the career, well, that one really got me. And I had to understand why. And the research shows that it's not what you think, not because they just wanted to go home with their families. That's a small percentage of that. But the majority of it, 80% of the women drop out because they don't think they're a fit. They don't think they belong. They don't see people that look like them in executive positions. They face microaggressions and career advancement disappointments, and they just drop out. So after learning this, I was pretty frustrated, to be honest. And then I turned that into inspiration and motivation. And instead of just, brushing this whole thing off, I went in like I tend to do, full in, and I started a Women in Tech initiative at Capital One. That is now, 6 years later, a mass movement with thousands of members and people working across our tech organization to impact diversity and inclusion, not only in our own company, but in the industry, and really has shaped Capital One's approach to diversity and inclusion. So I said mine was a bit of an unlikely story, given where my life started. The fact that someone gave a math major a chance to get into tech, and the fact that I'm part of those 44% of women who stayed in tech. So despite that, though, I know from the work that I've done that as a straight, white, cisgender woman, my story is way more likely than it is for others. In fact, on my journey, I realized that the story for Black and Hispanic people in tech is not dissimilar. You can see from this chart that Black and Hispanic people are represented in tech at about half the rate that they are in all private sector jobs. And what's hidden between this data is this intersectional view. The fact that women of color actually make up only 9% of the entire tech industry. And that's inclusive of Black, Latina, and Asian women. So this whole sobering picture is why I expanded my efforts beyond the Women in Tech work and became the overall sponsor of D&I in tech. And I'm focused on all underrepresentation in our tech space at Capital One and in the industry more broadly. So I want to switch gears a little bit now. We've talked about the D in D&I, diversity and inclusion, the diversity challenge, or the numbers, the representation. I want to talk a little bit about inclusion, which was, I know, one of the important themes of the Embracing Change definition. So when I first started to learn about this data back in 2014, I also saw headlines like these. How Silicon Valley became the man. Silicon Valley's sexist programmer culture is locking women out of tech. As I started to look into this, this was the real moment for me to appreciate that people weren't going to have the kinds of opportunities that I had. And what it said to me was that the problem wasn't just about who's choosing to go into tech in K-12 or in the university systems, but it's a real systemic problem, a cultural problem, an inclusion problem. That dropout rate of 56% of women that I talked about earlier, an inclusion problem. And I'm going to come back to inclusion a little bit later in this conversation and tell you a little bit more about that. But I can tell you that this was the moment that galvanized my passion. I took this tremendous leap and realized that I had to speak up. And even though I was a tech professional, I didn't have any HR background. I knew very little about how to approach diversity and inclusion. But I had 30 years of my career in tech and a lot of passion and a senior executive position, quite honestly, that I could use for good, that I could use my inherent privilege and my good fortune to pay it forward and help others. And I have to tell you, I haven't always gotten it right, and I still don't. I still say things that I probably shouldn't say or don't say them in the way that they should be said. But I try, and I invited an open dialogue and tried to leverage that curiosity and empathy that I started to learn earlier in my life to again learn and then to pass on what I've learned. And I hope that's what I can do with you today. I honestly could probably spend the entire day talking to you about diversity inclusion topics. I'll just give you some snippets and some ideas of things that I've learned, and hopefully it'll just pique your curiosity to try to go learn more as well. So one of my really early learnings was how important allyship was, and it was a key component of the work that I've done. Early on, I was really curious, like, how does social change happen? If I'm going to try to, make social change, which is essentially what we're doing when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I had to kind of figure that out. And so I started to do research, and I found really that no major social change has ever really been solved without those in power or someone So as it so happened, right at the same time I was kind of starting out on this work, Emma Watson gave a talk to the UN as a spokesperson for this organization she's involved with called He for She. And Emma said that too often women's rights have been equated with man-hating. And she shared that the true definition of feminism is just that women and men should have equal rights and opportunity, something everyone can get behind. She clarified for me what I was feeling and why I had been uncomfortable with women's initiatives earlier in my career. You know, I grew up in the 60s when feminism was associated with being radical and angry. And if anybody's watching Mrs. America, you can get a whole sense of like what the attitudes were towards the feminism movement. And I didn't really understand until I heard Emma's talk why that way. It was truly an interesting moment for me, given what I was starting to learn about the tech industry. And it really pivoted my appreciation for the challenges. I really was starting to understand that gender norms are dangerous to everyone, quite honestly, and that my need to influence men to be part of this effort was really important. So we started a Men as Allies program at Capital One, and we were really clear to say it wasn't to save any women, but really to truly advocate for solving injustices, inviting them in and asking for their help, asking them to be curious about those systemic challenges that do lock women out of long careers in tech. And I also realized through the course of my work that we all find ourselves, because it's contextual, in need of an ally or our need to be an ally to someone else. So our Men as Allies program that we started with has just become Allies. We wanted to recognize, first of all, non-binary genders, and also to encourage everyone to be allies. We run Allies workshops now to help people really listen to other people's experiences and understand the marginalization in society that creeps into our workplace. Another really important question that I was asked really early in my career, which was kind of interesting, was like, does this matter? Why do we really even care about diversity? And it was kind of an insulting question when I was first asked it. And I thought, wow, that seems so obvious, of course. And these little faces, for example, aren't they inspiration enough? But I really had to give it some thought, and I really approached it in a really academic way and tried to really analyze, why does it actually really matter? And the more I learned and the more I see in the world, the more I appreciate that it matters. And I, again, could probably spend all day talking about this, but I'll just give you a few of the things that I feel like are super important. First of all, it just makes good business sense to have diversity. There is all kinds of research, and I don't know how anyone could even deny it if they look at all the research studies that have been done that say diverse teams are smarter, they're more innovative, better at problem solving, and they even make fewer mistakes. It seems that you would want to apply that to tech and engineering or any business problem, really. And it's really interesting that some of the newer research is actually finding that it's not because teams just have different perspectives, which we often talk about, but there's actually a true social dynamic at play that elevates everyone's performance when there's diversity on the team. And McKinsey does a really great annual report on the impact of diversity on companies' performance. And some of the results you can see here. And I've always loved this study because not only does it show that gender diverse companies outperform their peers, but ethnically diverse companies do even better. So it's not good enough to just focus on gender diversity. Another really important reason that it matters that we think about diversity is scarcity of talent. Tech jobs are growing at 4 times the national average of all other jobs. Today, there are already over 700,000 open tech jobs. And I think that's going to continue to rise despite our economic situation because of how important technology is to our response. Yet we're only graduating about 73,000 computer science related majors in the US. And even if you look at the non-traditional paths like boot camps where people are being taught to code, they're only producing about 20,000 graduates a year. And the other really unfortunate thing is that many of these boot camps are nonprofit and they need funding from corporations. Yet many corporations see this as like philanthropic work to serve an underserved population versus realizing that this is a true pathway to talent. Most companies are still looking at pedigree as a criteria for entrance into the technology field. And I find this super unfortunate. It's one of my primary passions that I really want to continue to pursue. I really want to help companies see that this talent crisis can't be solved in traditional ways. and that not every smart, capable person has the opportunity for a traditional higher ed education, especially one in computer science. Plus, if we have any hope at all of filling this talent gap, I don't know how we're going to do it if half the population just don't even see themselves in tech and they don't feel welcome. One of the things that really gets me is the socioeconomic gap created by technology. And it's what I referred to somewhat in my opening about the inequities that we see. Some of the highest paying jobs are in technology, and the socioeconomic impact of those who have tech skills and those who don't is creating even further divide. I love this chart from McKinsey again, they're good researchers. They predict that tech jobs are going to be up 34% by 2030. And I've seen much, much higher forecasts than that. So we'll settle in on 34% even with a little bit of a downturn. And yet physical jobs are going to be down 31%. And guess what? Those tech jobs are creating the downturn through automation and physical jobs. And as we know, these tend to fall along demographic lines. We've talked about the diversity challenge in tech, and we know what the population looks like that is typically in these physical work jobs. So this economic divide is continuing to widen along demographic lines. And for those of you who are students out there, or really early in your career, you're entering the workforce at a time and leading in a time when things are really going to be dramatically changing. 2040 is the beginning of the decade when the United States will be called what's called a majority minority. Not a term as a math major I can really get my head around, but it really refers to when non-Hispanic white people will become a minority in the US. Black and Latinx people alone will make up 40% of the US population by the mid-2040s. We already see it in kids under 5. At the same time that this shift is happening in demographics, we're seeing this tremendous impact that tech is having on our digitally driven economy. So as Black and Latinx people become the majority, and tech shapes how we interact with money, with information, and each other, we need to consider, one, who's building the tech products for this changing customer base, but we also have to appreciate that achieving racial equality in tech is not just about access to jobs, but access to power. And these stories, quite honestly, continue beyond the tech space because we know that we're gravitating more and more to high-skilled, knowledge-based workers, and the same story applies in many industries. So in tech, we do often talk about underrepresentation of women and Black and Hispanic people. But diversity comes in all forms, some visible and some not. And I usually think about diversity as about embracing and valuing differences and appreciating the stories of others, especially those who are marginalized in our society and therefore also in our places of work. But you can have diversity without inclusion. And honestly, that's worse, because you've invited people in, but yet you haven't given them the opportunity to thrive. Again, what we see in this dropout problem for women in tech. It's kind of like being invited to the party, but not asked to dance. One of my favorite examples of diversity without inclusion is the story of the ENIAC machine in World War II. So the ENIAC machines were secret during World War II. The men had built the hardware. And in fact, there were 6 really important women who were working on the project, doing all the calculations and the coding for the machines. They were even referred to as human computers. But when the ENIAC machine was declassified after World War II and the project team was shared publicly, this is what was shared. The project team of men. So it wasn't, in fact, even known until the 1980s that these 6 women who actually had done the coding of the ENIAC machines even existed. So this is a classic case of diversity, had diversity on their team, but they certainly weren't thinking inclusively about those women. So I want you to take a second right now and think about a time that you didn't feel included. And I want you to think about how it made you feel then and how is it making you feel now, just thinking about a time that you didn't feel included. I'll give you a couple seconds to kind of marinate on that. It's usually not hard. Most people think of something pretty quickly. Now I want to ask you another question. Think about a time that you felt you didn't belong. How did it make you feel? And are you thinking of something different when you heard me say you didn't belong versus you weren't included? I'll give you a few seconds before I move on to let you think about that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. If we were in an audience here and you could raise your hand and you could share your stories, I would certainly love to hear them. But I'll share a little bit about my story. When people ask me, when is the time you don't feel included? The number one thing that comes to mind for me is when my colleagues, every single time we ever go out for dinner, want to go to a steak restaurant. And I'm a vegetarian, have been for many years. And so, you know, I just go along with it. And I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'll eat the salad. I'll eat the carrot and the potato without the bacon. But the reality is inside of me, I feel like, gosh, could they one time maybe say we should go to a vegetarian restaurant so that I can be part of the group? But you know, group identity is really strong and we tend to cover in order to fit in. And so I always just say, it's okay, it's fine. And probably why we never do anything but go to steak restaurants. But when I ask you about not belonging, I know something comes to me every time I say, was a time you didn't belong? And that was when I was in 8th grade. We had moved during my 8th grade year in March of that year. And for some reason, there were 3 girls that decided they were going to make my life miserable. And they called me names. They would, you know, every time I got on the bus, they would try to get underneath me and trip me and not let me sit down on the bus. And it was really, you know, classic bullying, I guess. And it was so traumatic for me that I cried myself to sleep every night. In fact, if I think too hard about it right now, I could probably start crying again because it really impacts you deeply when you really have this sense of not belonging. So here I was, the new kid in town, and just really feeling like, I didn't belong in this place. Fortunately, I grew into it. But when we don't feel like we belong, when we feel like the other, we can spend up to 40% of our energy thinking about that versus being productive. I wasn't sleeping well during those years, during those months. And so my schoolwork was certainly suffering. And I was at an immediate disadvantage because I was spending so much time on feeling different. And this is really important in the workplace to appreciate that if we don't have inclusive practices, that people can spend a lot of their time feeling disadvantaged, because our ultimate goal is how people feel, and they need to feel that they belong. Accenture has this work that they do on inclusion, and it's really awesome. And I really encourage you to go watch a video called Inclusion Starts with I from Accenture. And inclusion really depends on context. You know, we can feel included in one environment and not included in another. And I love some of the examples they give in the film about ways in which people don't feel included. People thinking that they aren't relevant or ambitious as you become older, part of the older demographic, something we refer to as ageism. Feeling like your opinion doesn't matter, or that you're being talked over, associated with sexism. Feeling that you aren't as committed because you're a mom, the mommy penalty. Feeling that you're labeled aggressive and angry because you express your opinion, often associated with racism. Feeling that unease of being different in the room, feeling anxiety about how your disability is going to be viewed. And when people, again, don't feel included, they underperform. And I often look at this and I think, isn't this obvious? Like, why do we still have these challenges in our communities and our workplace? And a key to that is bias. If we're human, we're biased. It's important to our safety and efficiency. So biases aren't bad. They're designed for us to stay safe. But some of them are really kind of outdated, and they can really be harmful to those around us. We really have to be intentional about understanding that we're biased. So unconscious bias training is a really good way to do that. But that training alone, unconscious bias training, has been really proven ineffective, especially if it's the only thing that is done. You really have to start to appreciate the systems that hold people back and the way that our biases, in fact, contribute to these systems. There are ways that you can start to learn about your biases through things like the Harvard Project Implicit, or get tools about how to mitigate bias on a free website called Bias Interrupters. But you can't stop these biases because they're unconscious by definition. So you really have to work at mitigating them. And that's why I love organizations like the Neuro Leadership Institute that we use at Capital One, Bias Interrupters, that really teach you about bias interruption. I'm just going to give you one example to make this more concrete. Similarity bias is one of the types of bias that the Neuroleadership Institute talks about. And it's really about the fact that we prefer what is like us over what's different. And you can imagine that that similarity bias is going to creep into our decisions, especially people-related decisions, who we hire, who we promote, who we assign the good projects to. It occurs because people are highly motivated to see themselves favorably, of course. And so they see people that are like them favorably. We instinctively create in-groups and out-groups. And we generally have a favorable view of our in-group, but a skeptical view of the out-group. In fact, I've read fascinating research about how we will go to great and illogical lengths to protect our in-group against our out-groups. So overcoming similarity bias really requires us to actively find common ground, similarities with people who are different than us. And most importantly, to seek other people's opinions, especially those opinions of people who are different than us when we make decisions. So for example, when making a hiring decision, it's always best to have a group of diverse people interviewing and coming to consensus on whether or not to hire someone. Unmitigated bias, in fact, can lead to behaviors that really get in the way of inclusion and equality. Inclusion is felt very locally on teams, and so the good news is that everyone can play a role in fostering inclusion. There are a lot of tips here on this slide. I'll share the resources later with you all, so I'm not going to go too deep, but there are important things to think about, like the similarity bias. Who's on your team? Who are you listening to? Who has a voice? Who are you giving out the best assignments to? And are you really empathetic to everyone on your team and listening to their story? And a really great researcher, Edwin Burke, out of Deloitte, who I've come to love, has found that to realize inclusion on a team, everyone on the team, we tend to look at averages and we say, oh yeah, 60% of the people feel included. It's not good enough. She finds that everyone has to feel that they are treated fairly, that they're respected, that they're valued, and that they feel psychologically safe. So what is this thing psychological safety? I really love the research. Again, I'm big on academic researchers, as you can see, but I really love Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, and she writes this tremendous book called The Fearless Organization, and I recommend it for everybody. And she's quite an expert in psychological safety. And she really defines it as the shared belief that you can take interpersonal risk, like admitting that you need some help or that you failed, without that feeling punitive, that people can speak up about their concerns without being shut down in kind of a gratuitous way or feeling embarrassed, quite honestly. And it typically occurs when people have a lot of trust and respect for each other. What it's not like agreement for the sake of being nice. It's not agreeing with everything someone says. And it's not like an environment where there are no high standards. It's really just about open dialogue and open discussion and feeling safe to express your views. The really interesting thing is that when people feel that they can't speak up and they feel that fear, it really impacts their performance and that of their teams, of course. And that isn't a good outcome for knowledge workers who we really need to share their knowledge and insight. So when we're fearful, it even inhibits our thinking. We're less creative and we're less analytical. And staying silent is instinctive. It's one of the most fascinating learnings that I absorbed from this book. And that is this idea that no one really knows that you have a thought or that you thought about speaking up. So it's pretty low risk to stay quiet. It's a lot more risk to be willing to speak up. And that is why you have to work so hard at creating really safe work environments where people can speak up, because instinctively they would prefer to stay silent. You know, I've definitely seen this through my career where I've had situations where I've tried to speak up about something. I was shut down. I was kind of like got the, yeah, Julie, fine, maybe even embarrassed a little bit. And when that happens, you sort of revert to staying silent versus speaking up about your concerns. I even had a boss tell me once to just keep an "I told you so" folder rather than trying to, change everyone's opinions. And I was like, don't think that's a really good approach. And those are the kind of environments where things ultimately go wrong. So I really encourage you to read Amy's book. She has real examples in there of companies like Volkswagen who had major hurdles, financial hurdles, due to a culture of lacking psychological safety. But she also has some really good examples of how companies have really embraced psychological safety and made such a difference in the outcomes of their performance of their company. In addition to just the culture of companies that can lead to successes or failures, psychological safety does have a direct impact on team performance. Google did this really, really awesome study where they looked at over 200 factors of team performance to try to figure out what makes teams good. And what they found was that psychological safety was the #1 predictor of team performance. It has a lot of the same benefits of effectively diverse teams. So I love that stat. You know, leaders can foster psychological safety. They just have to kind of examine their culture and their own behaviors and those of their peers and really work to foster it. Sometimes, you know, the inhibitors are not at all intentional. They're not even things that you realize you're doing, or sometimes they come from like a legacy culture that you really need to change. And Amy does just a really great job of going through a whole framework that leaders can use to examine their culture and their teams and how to create more psychological safety. I won't go into detail on that because I want to get onto a few more thoughts. So let's tie this all together. We said diverse teams create better outcomes. Diversity without inclusion is not sustainable. Inclusion requires psychological safety. Psychological safety, in fact, is really great for marginalized people because they tend to have, you know, challenges speaking up because it isn't always encouraged or respected. But when we're all respected and included, we feel like we belong. And when we belong, we are at our best performance level. So it all ties together. Diversity, inclusion, belonging, and psychological safety are really important to creating a really inclusive culture where we all feel like we can do our best work. So I want to wrap this up with a call to action. For those of you who are students, you're getting an awesome Miami education. Maybe some of you are even out in the workplace now. And I really hope that you're preparing yourself for your workplace or your life. But perhaps like me, you've been in an environment at home or at school that sheltered you from those who are truly very different than you, those who come from historically marginalized backgrounds. Maybe you haven't felt the way that systems of our society have created a cycle of challenge that creeps into our workplaces. You're setting out to work and lead, most likely in professional environments where knowledge workers are needed and the customer base that we're serving is shifting rapidly. You are leading in the midst of this tremendous shift towards a demographically diverse workforce. And you're going to have choices to make. And honestly, they're not being made very well by most leaders today. Unfortunately, many CEOs and CIOs fail to play a truly authentic and active role in embracing change and seeing the ways in which they themselves perpetuate the systems that prevent diversity and inclusion from taking hold. Many want to place blame elsewhere. They blame K-12 or higher ed for not producing the diverse skills they need. They blame societal norms, and maybe they fall into the stereotype that credits hardworking individuals alone for those who elevate versus systems that hold people back. And they fail to appreciate that privilege gives people a head start. They make big public investments in nonprofits and they check the box that they've made their contribution to diversity versus really looking deeply at their own hiring and development practices to see where they could shift the outcomes. So I ask you to consider what I've talked about today, about why diversity matters, about allyship, bias, inclusion, psychological safety, and belonging, and about the cultures of companies that embrace change versus those that sit on the sideline and blame others. I personally was lucky to have had this disruption in 2014 that opened my eyes to the systems that hold people back, the marginalization of groups that carries into the workplace and prevents equity. It came late for me and it could have passed me by, but fortunately, I've always had an openness to listen and a curiosity to peel back the whys of a situation. That curiosity has served me well and impacted the way I lead, the way I think about talent and teams and opportunities. It caused me to examine my own biases and explore how I was personally playing a role in these systems of inequity. And it raised me up as an ally for those who could use my support. So what are you doing today in your own experiences at Miami or your work or in your community to open your eyes, to be empathetic and curious, to be humble and question, and to learn important life lessons that can escape us in the more homogenous environments that we often find ourselves? Are you taking this opportunity right now in this time of mass disruption to that we find ourselves in to really embrace new learnings? Because ultimately, let's face it, our role as leaders is just to be good humans, to bring humility, civility, and empathy to our customers, our associates, and our communities. You have a unique opportunity right now in this very moment to cast away the mean-spirited finger pointing and to bring forward a new discourse, to be the catalyst of real change and create the pathways that right the inequities that lay raw in front of us. In closing, I'm going to borrow from Emma Watson's UED speech. He says, the great statesman Edwin Burke said, the only thing needed for triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. So please ask yourself the questions Emma proposed that really stuck with me so deeply back in 2014. If not me, who? If not now, when? So when those opportunities present themselves for you to be a true leader of change, I hope you will remember these words and embrace them. Thank you. And now I think we're going to take some questions.
Hi, Julie. Thank you
Hi.
so much for joining us, sharing your story. My name is Laura, and I'm from Cohort 8, and we have a few questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, what inspires your curiosity? How do you inspire it in others?
How do I inspire curiosity? Well, I think that, you know, my curiosity was probably a little bit innate in me. I remember when I was a kid, I would my parents would have to pull me out of other people's conversations because I was always what someone might call nosy, but I was always trying to learn. They would say, why are you being nosy? I'm just trying to learn. So I think I'm innately curious and have always had a little bit of that DNA in me. But I do think that you do have to seek inspiration, and you just have to open your mind that, you know, learning is about appreciating what we don't know about other experiences. And so seeking it out, traveling, that'd be a nice thing to be able to do right now. But, you know, traveling, having conversations with people that are different than you, reading books about people that are different than you. I do a ton of reading, even fiction that's about such stories of people who are different than me. Is a real way to be inspired and to continue to be curious. And that continuous learning is, gosh, what keeps life fresh, right? So that's the way I think about that, Laura.
Thanks. That's very helpful. The second question is, if you make the wrong decision, how do you get back on track while still maintaining control?
I make the wrong decision a lot, so that's not unusual. We all make wrong decisions, and quite honestly, that's a really important quality of an inclusive leader. And creating psychological safety is that notion of being vulnerable, of admitting what you don't know, and admitting when you make mistakes, and we all make them. And so I think that's actually a key quality of a leader. And so you maintain control, because when you inspire people to want to follow you by being vulnerable and telling them you don't know everything and empowering them to help you solve the problem, then, you know, you stay on track.
Cool. I have another question. Who do you see as an exemplary individual when it comes to this challenge? What have you learned from them?
Oh gosh, I mentioned some of the people through the course of the talk. And it really has been a combination of a lot of different people who do really great work, and heroes, the people who have just been willing to be vulnerable, to share their stories as an African-American person, or as an immigrant, or, you know, as a transgender person. And they just inspire me and help me appreciate the challenges that people have. But there are certainly some really great folks who, you know, are out there either doing advisory work in this space, or doing a lot of research. I mentioned Juliet Bork, who I love, out of Deloitte, and another gentleman, Claude Steele, who does a lot of work on stereotype threat. And I've really just been completely enthralled with his work as well.
That's very interesting. The next question is, how do you best think creatively?
How do I best think creatively? Heads down. I definitely do my best work. I'm an introvert, so I do my best work kind of heads down. But I love to have a moment of inspiration. Maybe I go to an art museum, where I know you were supposed to be in Oxford, or go on a trip. And I keep a journal, and sometimes I write my ideas in the journal. And I tend to find that if I've had some really inspiring kind of offline moment, like those kinds of things, that then I look in my journal, I'm like, oh yeah, there were some of my most creative thoughts. So it's about seeking out the world and, going out in the world and gathering in all that inspiration of things that are about different people and different cultures and different experiences. And then I find that that's when I have my most creativity.
Cool. And then what helps you respond best to unforeseen and sudden change?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because I would say that there was a point in my time earlier in my life where I wasn't very good at that at all. Like, I was just very averse to change. And it doesn't seem that way as you probably listen to my story, but those moments of change have always been really anxiety ridden for me when they're really monumental change. But I think the more that I have come along in my life and my career, I start to realize that there are support systems. And so the best way to prepare yourself for change is to appreciate what support systems that you have in place. And typically we have some pretty robust support systems that we might not always leverage or we're afraid to leverage. But knowing that you have people there who can support you through the change, I always say, like, if you're going to jump out of an airplane, you don't jump without a parachute, right? And so if you're going to take a jump, where is your parachute? And I always try to make sure that I'm assessing, if I'm going to make a pretty big change, where my parachute is. And so I've gotten a lot better at being willing to take change, even though I know I'm going to have to work through the anxiety of it.
Yeah, that's very true. We have one more question for you, and it is, in response to COVID-19, how are you embracing change, not only in your company, but personally?
Oh, well, boy, we've all had to kind of really just pivot pretty quickly. Obviously, this whole work from home situation has created a whole new dynamic for everyone. I'm just so grateful that my company really was on the cutting edge of the digital transformation. And so we pretty seamlessly, in like literally 2 days, moved everyone home. And so we have like 95% of our staff working at home right now, and our technology is held up through all of that, which is great. And so I think connecting has been a really important thing to really figure out, is how do we stay more connected? And it's so interesting. I'm sure others are appreciating this, but I'm finding people are more connected now than they were before. And I was saying to someone even today that I'd never had a call. My 3 children live away from me, and we'd never done a call where it was all of us, including my mom, who learned how to use Zoom in the last couple of weeks. We never done that, ever. Like, why had we never had a call where we all came together on one single call on video, even though it's been around for a while, right? We just never done it. And so embracing ways to kind of stay more connected is certainly something I've been very thoughtful about. And, just also in our company, really trying to pivot towards helping our customers. That's been a super important, some financial stress in their lives right now. And so we've really pivoted to try to focus on how do we help our customers through this time of need.
That's really great. Yeah, that's all the questions we have for now.
Great.
So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. It's been very great. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again to Julie for that awesome keynote speech and Q&A session. Just as a reminder, if you had a question that didn't get answered here, we'll be having a post-summit call if you'd like to ask Julie or any of us any questions. So now we're going to be moving on to the second part of our summit, which is a presentation by Cohort 8 of the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute about what it means to embrace change. To start us off, let's listen to the experiences of change that Cohort 8 member Ryan Armstrong has had to deal with professionally.
Hi everyone! As Professor Mormon just said, I'm a junior bioengineering major here at Miami. The Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute is an organization that is composed of engineering and computing students who desire to expand their leadership skills and better prepare for their future careers. We do this through a rigorous transformational leadership experience where the first year is professional, personal leadership, second is people leadership, and the third brings them all together with strategic leadership. Personal leadership is, much like how it sounds, all about learning and analyzing the self, how we as individuals can grow to be better leaders. People leadership is most predominantly learning about how we as leaders can inspire others within an organization toward a unified vision or goal. Lastly, strategic leadership, we can learn how to combine person and people leadership to better apply it to industry and professional settings after college. After about 2 years in the Institute, my cohort members and I have quickly realized that in order to thrive as a leader after college, we have to learn how to adapt to change. At the beginning of the fall semester last year, this idea became evident when Professor Mormon asked us what we wanted to base our project on. Several weeks passed, and the notion of change was something all of us as a cohort could agree on. But now, a more daunting challenge lay in front of us. What is change? Determining what change meant seemed to be a topic fit for philosophers or people who had spent their entire life in the library. But nevertheless, we began attacking the problem and figuring out what change means to us, and how we would even go about researching such an abstract topic. Now that we were well into working on the project, we began to reflect on our own experiences to start answering the question we had set out for ourselves. The best real-world examples that presented themselves to my cohort members and I were all of our experiences in internships over this most recent summer. What we drew from these experiences, as well as lessons we were experiencing in the classroom, were how important digital transformation, understanding different personalities and behaviors, a growth mindset, and leadership development planning are to the professional environment. So please join us as we delve into our project of embracing change, as we ourselves embrace change due to these new circumstances. In every aspect of our lives, we become accustomed to a certain way of doing things. How computer programs work, how to effectively communicate, the types of work we do, the types of people we work with, so on and so forth. We develop a mindset stuck in our expectations. We are fixed in place and possibly resistant to expanding. What happens when reality interferes, infiltrates this stubborn mindset we have? What happens when things change and we resist? We suffer, individually and as a collective. In today's world, constancy is a rarity. Everything and everyone is changing more rapidly than ever before. In order to adapt and change in parallel, we need to learn to adapt on an individual level. This means we need to know ourselves, and we need to identify what roadblocks we face. These boundaries can manifest in a variety of ways, ranging from generic bias to implicit bias, from PQ to EQ, from mind bugs to mind traps. These and others will be the topics we go over today in terms of how we can approach and address these to best embrace the ever-changing world around us. Embracing change, as we describe it, is the personal determination to develop an open mind, embody inclusiveness, and inspire creativity daily. There are certain acknowledgments we have to make in order to embrace change effectively, however. To start, we must recognize that change is here and to stay, and that we should be prepared to experience pushback. This discomfort and loss of control are central to what change does to us. We need to know how much change we are capable of undergoing at one time, and any limitations we have can best spread out through long-term goals. Finally, we need to recognize that we need to be proactive and get ahead of the change. It is more detrimental when we react. If we get out early and accept the differences of others, rather than forcing our view, we are more likely to succeed in embracing change. So, everything is changing. Why embrace it? Why not just stick to your guns and dig in your heels? You could argue that's what people have done in the past. They were fine, so I will be too. One thing is different today though. Technology, specifically artificial intelligence, provides us an incentive to not think this way. If a worker at Amazon, for example, gets an attitude, in comes a machine that doesn't argue. Robot. People in the past did not have that threat. To stay at the forefront, to stay relevant, we must examine ourselves and make the necessary adjustments. If we don't have to anymore. Instead, we'll have to find a new job. In each of the topics we discussed today, we will try and relate back to the significance and importance surrounding the idea. How can you use them? What advantage will understanding them provide? we will be considering our own minds and the barriers we have. The topic of embracing change is really an important idea to me because I experienced firsthand the necessity of change in a professional environment, namely a year-long research project at the National Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. For background, I am from Oak Ridge, which is about 40 minutes outside of Knoxville. My high school has a unique program where we can work under a professional on a project over the course of the year, and then have the opportunity to present our work for the school and in several fairs around the state. Before I had even started my senior year, I was in contact with my advisor, who told me I would be studying the gassing process produced from different amounts of a solid silicon, nickel, manganese, cobalt ion battery pouch cell and different electrolytes at different temperatures. Big stuff, obviously. And as I'm certain you're all concluding now, I was neither equipped technically or professionally as a senior in high school to even begin performing solid work. But begin work I did. As the beginning of the year rolled around and I found myself touring the lab spaces, I would be spending the better part of 8 hours every week after classes. An important distinction to make at this point in my story is that I thought myself to be much smarter, capable, and professional than I was in any sense of those words. Being a senior in high school, I was at the top of the food chain. The idea that there were other food chains and other ladders to climb outside of class was completely foreign to me. So during my initial meetings and introductions, I didn't pay attention to the nuances of the meetings and interactions of other members of the group, especially the group had with one another or what I was really doing, to be completely honest. I was so blinded to my own faults by my childish ego, I didn't even know what a journey I was in for. Over the course of the first months of my work, I spent a lot of time reading, which I didn't do with any intensity because, why would I? This is my senior year. What more do I have to learn? Then I was tasked with making the electrolyte and pouch cells that I would use for the rest of the year, which I did without much scrutiny, again, because I saw the task as nothing more than me during my first group meeting, if that gives a good enough picture of where my mind was during this process. So, of course, these behaviors weren't going to last. And after I started to collect data and was told I needed to not only present what I found, but also my thoughts on why, of course, I had been had. I not only could not voice what was happening effectively, but I had no thoughts as to why some of my pouches were gassing and others weren't. So after an extremely embarrassing week and a half, I realized I had a problem and started examining what I was doing and asking my parents how I could change certain things so I wasn't the family embarrassment. I started back at the beginning by going through the readings, trying to understand what I had missed. I then started to focus and think about what was happening around me to funnel the knowledge into my work. The icing on the cake was realizing I, in fact, knew absolutely nothing. And the people I worked with were not only smart, but masters in a field I had participated in for less than a year. After all was said and done, I saw an issue with myself that was detrimental to my standing professionally at the present moment, as well as possibly into the future. Realizing the need to change, I worked hard to do so. Because of that, I was able to present my research in Los Angeles that year for the World Fair. Now that I know about embracing change, I realize that everything we will discuss with you today, I experienced in some form. Literally, all of the mind traps that we will talk about affected me to bias as well as saboteurs. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ryan. Ryan's story is a great example of adopting a growth mindset rather than maintaining a fixed one. To explain more about the basis of embracing change, here's 3 more Cohort 8 members, Dan Kraft, Matt Vito, and Landon Bramer.
One of the cornerstones of embracing change is the idea of a fixed versus growth mindset. Our source of this information is from Carol S. Dweck's Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. To understand the base of embracing change, we must first understand the fixed mindset. One of the most potent ways fixed mindset is described is as believing your qualities are carved in stone. This analogy is so potent because people with fixed mindsets see themselves as a near-perfect work, like Michelangelo's David. In theory, one could take a chisel to the masterpiece, But why would anyone purposefully do that? The idea that we already are perfect the way that we are is a large threat to embracing change. If someone is inherently unwilling to change and believes that they cannot change, then there's not even a chance to begin the process. In the fixed mindset, people will often blame the world around them for their troubles. In summary, it's a woe is me view towards the world. An example that I'm sure we can all relate to is getting worse feedback than we wanted on any type of evaluation. In these situations, honestly, it is so easy to blame outside factors, such as that person doesn't know what he's talking about, or I underperformed due to other events of that given day. Think of the last time you were criticized or fell short of your goals. How did you react? Did you blame other factors? Also, think about the validity of this next statement. Your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change, no matter how many new things you learn. If you found yourself unable to blame yourself for your shortcomings, or you think that the statement on intelligence is true, then there is a chance that you have a fixed mindset. This is not inherently a bad thing. However, it may be inhibiting your potential and success. This fixed mindset removes learning from failure, which is why it is so important to realize that none of us are Michelangelo's David. Honestly, there's little to no chance that we will ever get to that level of perfection, since there will always be changes to adapt to. Instead of seeing ourselves as a finished piece of masonry, we should instead see ourselves as a blank slate that is prepared mentally and physically to be sculpted every day. This willingness to be sculpted is what we encourage and is known as the growth mindset.
As you've heard earlier in our talk, learning about the growth mindset inspired us to dive deeper into how we embrace change. This changed our perspective on how we overcome challenges, grow from failures, and learn from successes in daily life. Not being afraid of failure and wanting to overcome obstacles so that you can build on your learnings enables a certain type of forward progress that we identified strongly with. What really sealed the deal was learning how the best business and leadership mindsets stem from a good growth mindset. Many Silicon Valley companies have been cultivating innovation and a growth mindset through transforming their office spaces into playrooms. Industry giants such as Google incorporate this idea of workshop communities within their facilities so that employees have creative outlets and can work together. These facilities enable people to become aware of how they think and how they can change for their own betterment. This new growth mindset that companies adopt gives them and their employees an edge in competition. This same mentality is seen in many different sectors of education. As students, certain aspects of growth mindset hit home really hard. Instead of making failures out of students' mistakes, these should be seen as opportunities to grow. At the end of the day, teachers are to students how leaders are to their teams. Everybody can be aware of their inherent mindsets and how to shape themselves with a growth mindset.
The next topic we're going to talk about is positive intelligence. Positive intelligence is the factor that measures your achievement. Each person's sum total of their skills and knowledge is multiplied by their positive intelligence, or PQ. If your PQ is low, you could be incredibly talented, yet achieve little just because of how much your own mind is working against you. Now, let's explore just what it means when we say your mind is working against you. Whenever you have doubts about your potential or question yourself, your mind is sabotaging your success. Thus, all the ways your mind works against you are defined as saboteurs. Saboteurs affect how you view and react to unexpected or difficult challenges and are the ways you self-sabotage. The judge finds fault with yourself, others, and conditions and circumstances. You might call the judge the king of saboteurs. Its main goal is to cause self-doubt, and all other saboteurs are based on the judge. It provides the foundation for how low positive intelligence can affect you. For example, it's that feeling of doubt in your head that starts as a seed that can grow into dominating your worldview. There are 9 other saboteurs that have more specific descriptions of how your mind works against you. By taking a test, you can determine which saboteurs live in your mind the most. The first one is restless. This means you're constantly in search of greater excitement in the next activity or through busyness. For example, nothing ever feels quite right, and you're constantly searching for the person, job, or place that brings you peace. Next, we have the controller. The controller runs on an anxiety-based need to take charge, control situations, and bend people's actions to your will. For example, this makes you feel crushingly powerless when someone or something else has control of a situation, not you. Next up, we have the avoider. The avoider focuses on positive and pleasant in an extreme way, avoiding difficult and unpleasant tasks and conflicts. You might notice that you have difficulty completing an assignment due in the next week, and you put it off by watching Netflix or exercising or just hanging out with friends, doing anything but the task at hand. Next, we have the stickler. The stickler has a need for perfection, order, and organization that's taken just a little bit too far. For example, you tend to feel OCD about your space and need to have rigid rules or structure in solving problems. Next, we have the pleaser. The pleaser compels you to gain acceptance by helping, pleasing, rescuing, or flattering others constantly. For example, you always feel a need to fit in and may change how you act in different groups. This can lead to a lack of self-confidence, though. Next, we have hypervigilant. Now, hypervigilant makes you feel intense and continuous anxiety about all the dangers surrounding you and what could go wrong. Murphy's Law is your guiding principle, but this leads to a loop of never making a decision due to fear of failure. Next, we have the victim. The victim wants you to feel emotional and temperamental as a way of gaining attention and affection. This is someone who tries to get affection out of those who would normally not care, just to get other people around them to shift their attention off the problem and onto the victim's problems in their heart. Next, we have hyper-rational. This involves an intense and exclusive focus on rational processing of everything, including relationships. This is someone who chooses to focus on the situation and remain detached. They limit their depth of relationships and their grasp of the problem around them. Next is the hyperachiever. They are dependent on constant performance and achievement for self-respect and self-validation. They're highly focused on external successes, leading to unsustainable workaholic tendencies and a loss of touch with their deeper emotional and relationship needs. For example, this is someone who puts their successes ahead of not only others, but themselves. And that concludes our talk on saboteurs. Now, after taking the test, I know that my top saboteurs are hyper-rational and controller. Now, if you know me, then this makes a lot of sense, as I tend to want to be in control of situations, and as an engineer, I hyper-rationalize many different things. Now, you might ask, how do we rid ourselves of these saboteurs? Unfortunately, we can't. Believe it or not, everyone has some form of all 10 of these saboteurs living in their mind, especially the judge. However, we can minimize their control of our lives and raise our PQ by flexing our PQ brain muscles and using the power of someone else living upstairs, our sage. The sage is the opposite of saboteurs and sees challenges or obstacles as gifts or opportunities. Just as there are many saboteurs, the sage has a few ways to combat them. First, visualize the child, or empathize. Saboteurs are not visible in children. The sage is the only thing visible. Pretend you are a child in a happy situation in order to build your caring and empathy. Next, be the fascinated anthropologist or explorer. View things exactly as they are and ask, why exactly is someone thinking that way? The next strategy is to say yes and, or innovate. After each idea you hear, say yes. What I love is, and we could also do blank. This way, every idea is appreciated even if there is room for improvement. Up next, we have flash forward or navigate. This strategy involves a fork in the road. Imagine you are towards the end of your life or project and ask, what decision do I wish I had made up to this point? In a group setting, ask, how do we wish we conducted ourselves at this point? Lastly, preempt the saboteurs or activate. Imagine you are each saboteur and purge their thoughts or plans from your mind. This way, you can discredit the saboteur before it can take control. The best way to strengthen that sage and flex your PQ brain muscles is to be aware of when the saboteurs are active. Whenever you feel doubt or any of the other ways that the saboteurs block our achievement, take a break or PQ rep, like weightlifting. For 10 seconds, take a step back and calm down. Once you realize the saboteurs are hindering you, it's easy for the sage to step in and get you back on track.
There are three main aspects to your positive intelligence. They are your saboteurs, your sage, and your PQ brain muscles. Luckily for memory's sake, each saboteur has a name that succinctly sums up what it does. There's the judge, a mindset which always finds faults in yourself, others, and the circumstances around you. The restless, the hyperachiever, the stickler, and the controller all try to get work done in a focused yet unhealthy manner. The avoider and the pleaser both try to make the group feel pleasant and positive, while ending up being a detriment to group's progress. The victim makes you feel emotional and temperamental in an attempt to gain attention and affection. The hyper-rational is the opposite of this and makes you focus in an intensely exclusive, rational process, often to the detriment of any sort of emotional logic. And finally, the hyper-vigilant makes you dependent on constant performance for self-respect at the cost of everything else. We each have these same 10 saboteurs. Some of us are affected more strongly than others are by certain ones. I myself happen to have the pleaser and the victim as my main saboteurs and internal antagonists. Yet understanding these personal saboteurs allows for the recognition of when they start to work. And this is able to help you look at your personal reality and thought process, allowing you to overcome the obstacles they lay in front of you. The sage is the opposite of a saboteur and is your greatest ally in fighting them. The sage is just what it sounds like as well, a way to step back and empathize with yourself and others, understanding any situation, allowing for you to make decisive action without distress, in creating new out-of-the-box perspectives and solutions. In other words, there is the embracing change of positive intelligence that it tries to promote. The intent of understanding oneself so that they can preempt their saboteurs and change perspectives to a healthy and productive one is exactly the type of forethought required to embrace change. Lastly, we come to the brains and mindsets. While earlier we discussed fixed and growth mindsets, positive intelligence focuses on your survivor and positive intelligence brain. The survivor brain used to be more important in everyday life, when we were hunters and gatherers, when there was danger all around and we needed those saboteurs to help keep us safe. But now, however, the positive intelligence brain is used in all facets of life to create, innovate, abstract, find the big picture, and empathize with the world around us.
Now that we've seen some of the differences between growth and fixed mindsets, let's discover some of the obstacles to embracing change with Cohort 8 members Dan Kraft, Matt Vito, and Mickey Smolinski.
But this survivor brain can't be the core concept in terms of positive intelligence, and as a matter of fact, it's not. Another concept that is shockingly similar to our survivor brain is known as mind traps. These mind traps function the same way your saboteurs do, as outdated pieces of evolutionary programming that limit our ability to embrace change and progress towards our goals.
Our information on mind traps comes from Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps by Jennifer Garvey-Berger. Mind traps are an integral part of the human condition that has been programmed into the human genome and psyche since we learned to live in sedentary communities and our lives became tied to the lives of others. These mind traps were designed and largely implemented to help us survive the day-to-day. However, with the increasing speed and complexity of the modern world, these mind traps tend to hinder us more than help us. For example, the skills a manager may have utilized 10 to 15 years ago to make sure each milestone and goal was reached might have trouble completing the same tasks today. These mind traps include rightness, wherein just because something feels right doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Agreement, as in we want to agree more than we want to continue a disagreement-filled brainstorming session and think creatively. Control, where we want clear, designated control over a situation. Ego, where we settle ourselves into who we are now, rather than seeing who we can grow to be in the future. And then finally, simple stories, where we want stories to have a beginning, middle, and an end, which is not necessarily always the case. Although it is easy to get stuck in these mind traps, overcoming these natural instincts can mean immense success in our ever-changing world. But what about the ways our hardwiring affects others? Implicit bias tests, or more formally known as implicit association tests, or IATs, were created through Project Implicit. Launched by Bethany Teachman of the University of Virginia and Mac Nock of Harvard University, they are used to showcase our own hidden biases and blind spots that subconsciously play into how we make decisions. Many forms of these implicit association tests exist, like ones for race, age, weight, and many more. Each of us in the Leadership Institute completed the Gender Career IATs and Race IATs to make ourselves aware of any subconscious decisions our brains might make. By understanding these associations that our minds may make implicitly through survival and culture, we can better understand factors that may be inhibiting our abilities to embrace change and forcing old ways of thinking on the modern world. Correlating with resilience, emotional intelligence can affect our relationships with others, ourselves, and the community. Emotional intelligence is having the capacity and the know-how to understand and utilize your emotions in order to decrease your own stress, alleviate conflicts, and empathize with others. We measure emotional intelligence on something called the EQ scale. EQ, or Emotional Intelligence Quotient, helps you succeed through managing your stress and intense emotional reactions. There are 4 main attributes to work on to increase EQ. The first one being self-management. This is controlling personal feelings and destructive behaviors, taking initiative, following through, and adapting to changes. Then self-awareness, where you are aware of your personal behaviors and thoughts and how they affect your life. Then socialize well, work well with others, and keep good relationships. Overall, having an high EQ can assist you in helping your mental and physical health, deepening your relationships with others, and improving your professional performance.
Adult development is a way of describing how the mind changes as we grow older. There are 4 main stages of adult development. As you might imagine, the first stage is the simplest, and the 4th represents the most complex and beneficial stage for ourselves and those around us. These stages can also be described as forms of mind. It's also important to recognize that these forms of mind do not represent linear development. It's possible to exhibit each form of mind at any point in our adult lives. However, realize that the 4th stage is certainly the most enlightened. The first stage is the self-sovereign mind. This form of mind is focused on how the world will work for you. It's the most basic form of mind and can seem a bit childish or selfish. And that's because this is the most common form of mind for teenagers. While teens are learning about the world around them and learning to create independent thought, nearly everything is still provided for them, and they start to think that's how things should work. Self-sovereign forms of mind ask questions such as, what's in it for me? What are others doing that will affect me? Or, what are the immediate rewards or consequences if I do X, Y, Z? The next form of mind is the socialized mind. This form is dominated by a consideration for how a person fits into the world around them or society. There's a sense of self-doubt in this form because it's a person's thought processes may be controlled by a need to fit in or seem like they're doing the right thing. This form is common in younger adults who still care deeply about their place in life. Questions they may ask are, what will others say? Who will tell me whether I'm right or not? Or, how will this decision affect my standing in the group? Next, we have the self-authored mind. This stage of adult development is characterized by knowing who you are and what you want. When you know this, you can begin to work towards those goals and make decisions that will lead you down the path you believe is right. This stage of mind can be hard to reach as a young adult, since we rarely truly know what we want. While this stage represents balance and a positive direction for our development, it does not take into account the whole point of this summit, change. Questions self-authored minds may ask are, how does this forward my values, goals, or principles? Is this a good problem to take on? Or, how do I develop standards to judge my success? Finally, we reach the 4th stage, self-transforming. As you might have guessed, this is the form of mind that represents embracing change. The self-transforming mind knows that the world around them is changing. In order to find success, you must ask questions that allow you to adapt and focus on goals while considering outside forces. This form of mind gives a bird's eye view of everything going on in one's life and the world around them. Questions they may ask are, what can I learn from this? How does this issue reshape myself and others? Or, what assumptions have I made that affect my perception of this problem? Recognizing which form of mind we are currently exhibiting, we can move towards embracing change by moving up that ladder and beginning to ask more self-transforming questions.
Adult development is just one of the many parts of embracing change. But as we have pointed out, there are many challenges to this. It is essential to understand that none of these changes can happen overnight. The attitude of embracing change will take years to develop, and it is impossible to fully develop due to the ever-changing world. This is a daunting task that can be attained by having grit and resilience. First, we learn about the idea of grit. This comes from the book entitled Grit by Angela Duckworth. Mrs. Duckworth describes grit as passion and perseverance for long-term goals with stamina and sticking with your future day in and day out, while also working extremely hard to make that future a reality. Potentially one of the most interesting parts about grit is that it's not actually related to IQ. Mrs. Duckworth concluded that IQ is an indicator of how quickly and easily someone learns new information. High IQ can make being gritty easier, but high IQ individuals are not necessarily gritty. I learned from an early age that in school I needed to work harder to attain similar goals to those whose school came naturally to. This was much more obvious in high school than it is now in college. I vividly remember taking my US history class with some of my best friends and talking to them about upcoming quizzes or tests, normally the day of, and them saying that, oh, I never study, it just kind of seems to work. Meanwhile, I would respond with, oh yeah, me too, knowing full well that I studied for hours the previous night. Then, a week later, we would get our grades back, and lo and behold, my friends would either get the same grade as me, or sometimes do even better. It's easy to think to yourself, oh, they studied and are just doing the same routine as I am. But, because these were some of my closest friends, I knew that they genuinely did not study. This fact baffled me for all 4 years of high school. And then college happened. And I still stay in close contact with many of these same friends, and we are all doing various types of engineering at various schools. The difference now is that many of those same friends struggled out of the gate at college, whereas I was able to make the transition with relative ease. Once again, I was confused by this because I know deep down that they are inherently smarter than I am. Then, once I read through this book, I realized that multiple factors through my life instilled grit into me. I knew how to put my
Sorry about that, folks. We are having some audio technical issues. But for now, I guess what we can do is we still have the subtitles, thankfully. So hopefully the subtitles can clue you in onto what's going on while we try and fix our technical issues. hopefully you could get some context of what was going on from the subtitles. Again, I do apologize for the lack of audio for the last 5 minutes of that video. I think something happened when we tried to render the video. So, whoops. That's what embracing change is all about, is dealing with the issues that we have when facing technology or any other issues that we're dealing with. So we're embracing change today. And now finally, to conclude the section, we will do a deep dive into our mission statement presented by Cohort 8, Molly Carroll.
Thank you. As Brad mentioned, I want to conclude our segment with this. It is not our goal to force you to change. The purpose of explaining saboteurs, mind traps, and grit is not to flood you with information. We are attempting to expose you to some of the information that we found to be helpful while we began exploring how to embrace change. Let's remember our mission statement. Embracing change is the personal determination to develop an open mind, embody inclusiveness, and inspire creativity daily. Open-mindedness was one of the first ideas that we settled on. If you are willing to retain an open mind, then you are well on your way. Along with open-mindedness, inclusivity is paramount to this idea of change. You cannot begin to transform without first recognizing diversity, whether it be in thought, age, socioeconomics, race, or otherwise. Maintaining an inclusive state of mind is extremely important, as with change comes many opportunities to embrace diversity. When challenges arise, it is important to come up with creative solutions to tackle these obstacles. That is where creativity comes in. Our final pillar seemed like a logical addition to our topic of change. Embracing change as creativity leads to new ways of thinking, which in and of itself is embracing change. Ultimately, we must be patient. This transformation will not happen overnight. That is why the final word that we will leave you with today is the idea that one must be mindful of embracing change daily. It takes 21 days to form a habit, and we hope that by practicing our 3 pillars, open-mindedness, inclusivity, and creativity on a daily basis, your ability to embrace change will become just that, a habit. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly, for sharing more information about our mission statement. We will now move on to the third and final part of our summit, which is an alumni panel. The Lockheed Martin leadership has been going on for 8.5 years now, and as a result, we have alumni in all sorts of industries and disciplines. Here, we would like to share some of their experiences of how they've had to deal with embracing change in their professional careers.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from Miami in 2015 and then went straight to Ohio State, actually, the School of Medicine there. And that's kind of where I started medical school, 4 years there. And then this last March is when we match, and I matched into University of Washington in Seattle. My partner, John, came with me, luckily. And so I matched into emergency medicine. And what that kind of means is like we rotate in the ERs, but we also rotate in the ICUs here, the operating rooms, and kind of different places to get a good flavor and a good vibe of everything.
Hi, I'm Stephen Deer. Cohort 5, studied chemical engineering at Miami. Right out of school, actually like 2 weeks after school, I started working right away for Anheuser-Busch. I accepted a role as an operations group manager. So I was in the operations department. So I did that for about 6 months. Then I got a new role in the logistics department. So I was in charge of our primary materials all coming in for the packaging lines. Did that for about a year. And then just this past March, I got a promotion into the brewing department, where right now I'm in charge. I'm pretty much just a process engineer.
Of course. So my name is Jean-Paul Mugizi. You can call me JP. I graduated from Miami Leadership Institute around 2014. I did software engineering and computer science. After that, I moved to Seattle, where I was part of the IT Career Foundation program at Boeing. Spent a few years there, and then ended up in the federal government working on a program that started with President Obama around getting more newer technology into the federal government.
I graduated from Miami in 2017. I had majored in biomedical engineering with a concentration in bioinformatics, and I had computer science and Spanish minors. So right after graduating, I started work at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis. And for those who don't know, Lilly is a pharmaceutical company. We're producing insulin, but we obviously have medicines and other therapeutic areas as well. And I work specifically in medicines development IT.
So I am Jessica Gertz. I was part of cohort 1, and I graduated in May in 2014. So when I graduated, I moved up to Green Bay, Wisconsin to start working for Procter & Gamble at a toilet paper mill. So we make toilet paper, paper towels, and puffs. And as you can imagine, our demand is through the roof right now. So we're working very hard to get those cases out the door.
I graduated this past May. I was in cohort 6, and I'm currently a first-year medical student at the University of Cincinnati. So I kind of went to more school. So that's kind of what's been keeping me busy.
I was kind of thinking about this, and I think that really schooling in general just kind of gives you the toolbox that you need, like the different type of tools and the way to go, and then you bring that with you to whatever your career might be. Like, you're not going to use every tool in the toolbox, but knowing what tool to use when is kind of the the challenge of going into a career. And a lot of real world problems too are just like super messy. They're not like the basic, right? Like it's an essay form and you fill out, or multiple choice. Like real problems kind of suck, and not suck, but are just harder to manage.
Right.
And so like we take care of a lot of opioid users, for example, in the emergency department, and keeping those people alive is actually probably the easiest part, and probably the part that I learn in med school, and what you kind of learn as you go through your schooling. But the other things surrounding that, like that person's probably homeless, like where are they going to go after their ED stay? And hey, they probably have a mental health disorder, an addiction disorder, and what are we going to do to manage that? And so kind of looking at all these different things and not just answering the one question is what makes kind of real world problems harder, but more rewarding in the end.
One of the bigger things too is not a whole lot of people like right out of college are put directly into a management role, especially where you're managing people that are your parents' age, that have been doing things their way for decades. And it's sometimes pretty tough for them to take a kid like me coming right out of school to like, I'm their manager. So it's a very interesting dynamic getting used to that too, when in college, like you're not doing any of that. The Leadership Institute puts you through experiences like that, but going out and actually doing it where you're managing people and like that's affecting their career and accountability with people that are your parents' age is pretty difficult.
It's really increased diversity in my job and probably many jobs compared to college. I think specifically the big obvious one is age, right? So for sure, college, you're surrounded by everybody that's 18 to 22 years old. So I think there's, for me personally, there's definitely an obstacle of, building up my self-confidence to be like, okay, I have as much to add to this project as anybody else. Now, there's obviously like some humility in saying somebody who's been at Lilly for 25 years has different experience than I do. That's fair. But instead of, looking at those people who are our parents' age and saying, oh, I don't know if I can speak up at this time, and, I don't know if my idea is going to be as good as theirs. That's something that was a big obstacle for me to kind of reframe that and say, okay, no, like I bring a different set of experiences. I probably have maybe some more relevant ideas as it relates to technology than some of these people, and that's valuable. So I think, just understanding, hey, like I deserve to be here. They hired me for a reason, and I have a voice and I need to use it.
I think for me, when I was at Boeing, I got to a point where I definitely felt like I needed to do something that had a more of a social impact. Boeing is great. It's a great company. They build airplanes, of course, but I think switching gears into the federal government kind of showed me how technology can be used for good, and it can be used in ways that help a lot of people, especially vulnerable populations. So that's something that I wanted to get in, and I think being part of the federal government program allowed me to have that social impact. One of the places that I've been, I definitely had to navigate how to be. I joined a team that had a different culture, and I felt that I was not being included or respected in what I was doing. I felt that there was a lot of like hurdles into trying to kind of like what I'm doing is being accepted, or just being trusted as part of the team. And definitely Professor Mormon was very helpful. We had a long conversation on the phone about navigating conversation with my manager and my teammates. And that definitely took a toll, and it was kind of an unexpected obstacle, because I felt like once I had a lot of expectations, a lot of good expectation about like that particular company that I joined, and then it ended up not being what I thought it was. So it kind of took me off guard. It's like, how do I navigate this?
A situation that I was actually in very early was as a department leader of a paper machine for the very first time. So I'd been there for a couple of years, done some quality work, reliability engineering, and they put me in a role where I was now the manager of all the people on the machine. That machine was actually only running half schedule at the time. So we had two teams that ran it for 3.5 days straight, and the machine would shut down for a few days. There was a crisis in the company and really with another mill, and they suddenly needed our line. This is my first 2 weeks in this role, to go from having 2 teams to having 4 teams and running 24/7. So I had to very quickly navigate, how do I split up the skills I have on these 2 teams into 4 teams to have the right distribution. I took in bodies from another area of the plant that did not have experience on a machine before. It's not that type of machine, and find ways to split them up. Those are really real implications to people's lives and schedules too. On very short notice, you're telling people, hey, you thought you were going to have these weekends off and these days. Some of them have spouses and kids that they've arranged childcare for. So trying to be sensitive to all those needs, weigh out all the options, but also you had to make a decision very quickly.
We have this saying at Cincinnati where every day, like, you get 2 pancakes and you have to eat the pancakes. And because next day you're going to get 2 more pancakes.
Right.
And if you don't eat your pancakes, you're still going to get more pancakes the next day.
Yes.
And like 2 is reasonable, but like once you get up to like 8 and 10, like you're not going to finish the pancakes.
Can't do that.
So I say all of that to say, like, you have to eat your pancakes every day. Like, you have to watch lectures, you have to review things, and like, you can't stop that train.
Yeah.
And that kind of pressure and attitude has been a lot of what's kind of pushed me through this time of like, I still need to learn this material. So
Yeah.
we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is those soft skills. And I remember Professor Mormon always teaching us the soft skills. And, you know, you have to remember like conflict resolution and your communication style and your leadership style. And I remember sometimes, right, like you don't really see the light at the end of the tunnel, but especially now when I chose a path where I'm actually not using probably any of my engineering, curriculum, the 4 years that I spent. But what I am using is a lot of those soft skills. So conflict resolution, for example, like learning to manage with nursing and other consultants all the time in the emergency department. Like you have conflicts all the time, and being able to, keep things professional is really important.
I'm realizing this actually, my biggest learning probably came from the time I was a TA rather than a student.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of a different role. But the phrase that kept coming to mind, especially over the past few weeks, is like, this world, it's not about you. I think about like the feedback that we get as medical students. Mm-hmm. In most contexts, like feedback is really hard to hear. But it is well-intentioned. It's meant to grow you no matter what.
Right.
And within like how I'm learning right now, like I would much rather a standardized patient in a simulation tell me I'm being mean or condescending or like not explaining things well. I'd much rather that be the case and learn how to do that than potentially marginalize a future patient. So like the Institute taught me to really desire that context and understanding of why people act the way that they act. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, like you can make false assumptions and destroy teams.
Tactically, you're especially like junior year, right? We all say this, but you're like put in this like fairly high stress situation, even different for you guys having to go with this change like a month before your conference is supposed to happen. But it gives you that opportunity to figure out how you do respond in those situations. And, I said I deal with a ton of different type of people at work. And so just recognizing people are different from me. I'm not working with everybody that's the exact same. And that's okay. And that's good. And that cultivates creativity and innovation. So I think, as students, you can be like so drilled into, I have to finish this equation for differential equations class. And like, that's what my whole focus is on. Like, have I ever used any of that in my job? No, I'm not saying that nobody ever will. But I think the higher perspective around leadership and communication and developing yourself personally, that's been what's been super applicable in my job.
The other thing is coaching, because we do a lot of coaching to our operators. Like, it's not accountability. It's just like, hey, this is what happened. Here's how you should do it in the future. And then that's kind of tracked in a way. But the way that the company approaches it versus the way that I kind of do because of what we learned in the Leadership Institute is like, we don't have the answer. We're just trying to get them to figure out the answer on their own. Right. And I think that goes lengths, like with how, without knowing the answer, you're not biasing the questions that, if that's even a word, that you're not making the questions biased to get to the point where you want them to get. Instead, they're getting to the place that just makes the most sense.
Right.
As I kind of said, when you go into the workforce, there's a much wider variety of people than college. Yes, there's a lot of diversity in a college campus too, but there's a lot even more diversity in both generationally, especially too, in the workforce. Some of the stuff, even the simple things like early on in Lockheed Martin, we learned how to know our Myers-Briggs and work with others. So I found that very helpful. I am a huge extrovert, and not everyone functions that way. Being able to both understand, right? I can usually, even if the other person may not know they're an introvert, or all the different other ways that you know, thinking, sensing, feeling, I can usually start to pick up on some of those things and try to be more sensitive. Sometimes I try to just make myself quiet down, right? Allow that quiet, empty space for people to think and process without all of my words. I'll even be very open about the fact when I'm working with new individuals and teams, hey, I know that I think by, here's how I operate. I know that I think by talking out loud, and sometimes I talk too fast, and kind of putting that out there makes it safe for them to, you know, I'll encourage them, please call me out if I'm going too fast. You know, let me know.
Thank you to our wonderful alumni and their insights on embracing change. We would like to thank you all once again for joining us today in embracing change with us virtually. We'll be sending out a video of our live stream to all the participants in case you'd like to rewatch certain aspects of the live stream later. And an additional reminder that we will be having a session after this at 3:15. That's sort of like a post-summit session. And now to close us off, Professor Mormon has a few words that she would like to say.
To everybody, thank you so very much for being with us today. And as Brad said, before we move on to our regular Zoom meeting and close today, I just want to very, very deeply thank all of the students. They worked so hard. They had to put this together remotely without all of the wonderful equipment we have at Miami University. And they just all pulled together and did a beautiful job. So thank you very much to the students. Have a wonderful day, and please stay healthy and safe.